Coming up around the nation, Coach Prime's son, Shedeur, keep doing what you do. Another classic and another MVP performance. And don't forget, y'all, the best player in FCS may be at Alabama A&M, and he ain't ready to give up that title yet. The bus is cranked up, and we're ready to roll. Jump on board. It's the HBCU Sports Nation, and we rolling out now.
1, 2, 3, hit it! Black Island move. Ride, come on! Black College, stand up! HBCU!
And what's the deal, friends, fellows, country folks, even those of y'all around the way? I'm Mark Gray. Thanks for hanging out with us as we take you around the Black College Sports Nation. Y'all HBCU folks just got to deal with it because we are the only source with all the news that's fit to talk about from around the world of HBCU sports and culture. And let's not get it twisted. College football is all about traditions. And the more things change, the more they stay the same, both on the field and off the field. I don't care what conference you're in now. If you were dominating your little brother of the region, chances are you're still dominating little brother from the region. If you are a champion and you bring a swag into the season, you keep that swag until somebody knocks it off. What did Ric Flair say? You want to be the best? You got to beat the best? Let's check out the best that the HBCU ballers had to offer as we roll into the highlight zone. And let's head to Jackson for a Saturday afternoon showdown. It was the W.C. Gordon Classic, and it was about Shedeur Sanders. Coach Prime's signal caller passed for 251 yards and tossed three touchdowns to lead the Tigers past Delta State 24-17. Glenn Misiak started scoring. His 40-yard field goal splits the uprights. Sanders then gets the air game going, connecting with Keith Corbin III in the first quarter. Jackson stayed up now 10-0. Sanders then finds Corbin again late in the second with a 13-yard toss. I sense a trend developing here. Corbin, the third, grabbed 8 passes for 113 yards and 2 touchdowns in his coming out party for the Tigers. Sanders' third touchdown pass came late in the third quarter to Warren Newman. And maybe a star is born. He's getting a lot more touches in the offense these days. He came into the game after a career-high 10 receptions 2 weeks ago at Louisiana Monroe, and that career high lasted for only a week. The senior set another mark for his career with 11 catches in this contest. And Shedeur, keep doing your thing, young fella. Another classic, another MVP. Jackson State rolls past Division II Delta State 24-17. Now a week off for Coach Prime. Fireworks in Mobile as Alabama A&M and Tuskegee roll up over 1,000 yards of total offense as the Stars showed up and showed out in this in-state rivalry game, which dates back to their days in the SIAC. Alabama A&M quarterback Aqeel Glass once again living up to the hype, going 27 of 39 for 405 yards and 4 touchdowns. However, he did have a rare pair of interceptions. Junior wide receiver Abdul Fattah Ibrahim. Listen up, y'all. It's a baller. Might be a low-round pick, might be undrafted, but he continues to be a game changer, catching 8 balls for 177 yards. And he was joined by another offensive threat. That will come in the form of senior wideout D. Anderson. The 6'6" target hauls in 3 touchdowns part of a 5-catch, 80-yard night. Running back Gary Quarles had a career high 164 yards on 24 carries, 2 of them ending up as touchdowns, including one from 44 yards to put this game away. Lewis Williams does his best to lead the passing attack for Tuskegee. The Red Tail goes 12 of 23 for 210 yards and a pair of touchdowns. Avante Patterson leads their ground game with exactly 100 yards on 18 carries and 3 scores, but it's not enough. Bama A&M now 3-0. Somebody forgot to tell everybody they still are SWAC champs. They rolled Tuskegee 45-35. Golden Tigers dropping to 1-3. To Dallas, where Prairie View A&M got back on track by beating Grambling in the Big D. Panthers won their 4th straight over the Tigers in the annual State Fair Classic at the Cotton Bowl, where the only thing bigger than the game is the side of the burgers and, believe it or not, those big turkey legs. Trust me, gotta have one, y'all. A rare Sunday matinee as Mississippi Valley hosted Southern at the Vet in Jackson. You know, after the rains come, they had to get out of Itta Bena and play in the state capital. Didn't matter. Southern went to the bullpen themselves. Quarterback Glendon McDaniel has a career day, replacing Ladarius Skelton, who always seems to have problems with coaches, despite the fact all he does is win games. And to what was once a premier matchup when the two teams played in the MEAC. North Carolina A&T gone to the Big South. North Carolina Central representing for the MEAC. Aggies still regulating the Carolinas, y'all, even after switching to the Big South by straight poleaxing the Eagles in this no longer MEAC game, 37-14. That's your highlight zone. We got more of what you came here for on the other side as we rock on. Stay with us. The story of a case that moves forward as the NCAA being called out about APR bias. Stick with us. That's what's going on around the HBCU Sports Nation when we get back.
1, 2, 3, hit it! Black Island move. Ride, come on! Black College, stand up! HBCU!
Hard to believe that college basketball season is right around the corner. This time in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be having conversations with basketball coaches who are ready to tip off. A few years back when Savannah State was in the MEAC, seems like everybody used to be in the MEAC, there was a brother named Troyce Manasseh who fell in love with the Savannah State campus after taking his national visits. Manasseh was recruited by everybody from his junior college on both the what would be considered FBS levels and into the mid-major levels. But he fell in love with Savannah State because he wanted the HBCU experience and to play in the NCAA tournament representing. What he found out when he got there was that Savannah State would be on probation for things that happened before he got there. Is the NCAA's APR rule culturally biased? Well, the U.S. District Court in D.C. says they can press forward with their case, and Manasseh is one of the plaintiffs.
And so other schools, higher conferences, they started to reach out to me through different people, and they wanted to recruit me from Savannah State, knowing that we had this postseason ban before I even knew. So being faced with the decision where schools, higher conferences, more money, just more resources wanted me, and having to make that decision of saying, I want to be loyal to the HBCU because they wanted me before any of these schools. And so going through that, I was like, is it like a loyalty over royalty type of thing? I'm the type of person, I'm loyal. So just to be put in that position where I would have to choose, something more shiny, like the better conference, more exposure, things of that nature, over the people that stuck with me when those other schools didn't want me. I felt like I was in such a tough spot. And so going into the season, at first, one thing, at that time, Stetson, if you familiar with Stetson, the college?
Mm-hmm.
So
The
they had a
Hatters.
postseason
Yes.
ban, but they were still able to play in their conference tournament. I guess that was the rules of the conference that they're in. But so I was under the impression, well, at least we still get the conference tournament, like Stetson, like even if we don't get NCAA. So then after I already committed to come back to Savannah State, I told them, you know what? I found out that we weren't going to get even a conference tournament at all. But I already committed to come back to Savannah State, and I turned down offers. And things like other schools were trying to give me were like, or they're telling me like cost of attendance. You know, HBCUs don't get that. They don't have the luxury to give players cost of attendance to cover the full, cost of attending college. And so just entering that season, knowing like I'm not going to get this, I'm not going to have that, and I could have had it, and had to go through the season knowing we weren't playing for anything. It really was a shot to not just my morale, but the whole team morale. It was, we tried to make the best of the situation, but it was something that was very difficult to overcome. They have a lot of students on the team that's not fully invested because they're not, they don't have the full maximum scholarship, which, to be honest, it was a lawsuit about that, where they were, which I received a lawsuit for that, the big class action lawsuit where the Pell, they wasn't giving people the full scholarships, and they was making people use their Pell grants to pay for some things. So I think that it started with not having a lot of scholarship money and kids that wasn't that really totally invested in academics, that were only invested in, just playing, and not having the resources to help these kids. As far as one academic advisor that might cover 2 or 3 sports, whereas like the bigger schools have academic advisors. Then you traveling on the road, a lot of negligence, a lot of people can't be on top of these kids. And I know it's not the advisor's responsibility, but at the bigger schools, they have people dedicated for that. And when you don't have nobody pushing an 18 or 19-year-old kid, sometimes they need that guidance or that advisor to be like, hey, you're going on the road this week. Make sure you're getting this work in. The advisors email your teachers and all of this stuff. And I think that having 18 and 19-year-old kids that before I was there that came into the program, dropped out or flunked out or didn't graduate, or even people who got their 4 years, I think that a lot of HBCUs, especially, they get a lot of transfers, a lot of junior college transfers. And a lot of those people in junior college credits not transferring all the way to Savannah State. So then those people are behind, and then they don't graduate, which affects the APR. So it's like a trickle down of a lot of moving parts, like a lot of moving parts that just adds to.
Yeah, I do think that there are some inherent issues with the APR and its application. And we see that with the impact that you look at the statistics for the last decade, for example, and you have HBCUs that are 43 times more likely to be banned from postseason and to be subjected to these penalties than a predominantly white institution. We also know that there are other studies that show that even when you control for things like resources, that it actually, race comes out as a big factor in that determination. Does that mean resources aren't important? Absolutely not. In fact, we know that the predominantly white institutions have a lot more resources to make sure that their student athletes are able to meet those measures. So our lawsuit is basically saying this is a systemic form of discrimination when you have this history of penalizing basically HBCUs for taking the students that may be at risk, students that are maybe first generation, students that may not have had the same resources before college when they come to college. And HBCU's mission is really to serve those students. And so they're penalized coming into the gate by the NCAA because of where they started from. And the NCAA's measurements quite frankly, don't really even measure accuracy of their educational attainments. So far, we haven't heard much from the organization, and so we don't know what their conversations or their position is. I do want to point out, Mr. Gray, that a lot of people, I think, in 2020 believe discrimination only happens when you have racial slurs and that they're and bad hearts and malicious intent, and that's not necessarily always the case, and that you can have discrimination and systemic discrimination that continues through decades and generations, and you land yourself in a position like we are here today, where you have these systems that have just repeated themselves, and you have the impacts that you have today, and you have the processes that the NCAA took or didn't take, and other kind of factors that go into that intentional discrimination. So I think it's a misnomer for a lot of people to think that, oh, there could not be discrimination here by the NCAA because they care about their Black athletes. They care about, giving them a proper education. And I think that misses the mark as to what exactly is about systemic discrimination.
And I like to stay, Mr. Gray, around the economics of it for the institution, for the NCAA, right? It's about, we see with other legal concerns and questions around images and likeness of some of the athletes in the NCAA that, this is about economics. And so I think that obviously, I think that they definitely have some reservations or some concerns as it relates to the economics. And I just also want to say, Mr. Gray, that the level or the depth of this discrimination that HBCUs have encountered is so deep that I've talked to athletes at HBCUs who, when they got there as freshmen, if they didn't have the same, hours of practice time that they had in high school, they accepted that as that's the way that it was. They didn't even have a recognition that it was because their program was being penalized for athletes 4, 5, 6 years ago, but they just kind of accepted it for the way that it is. And so that goes back to what Jay Young was saying in terms of like how deep and how entrenched this discrimination system is against our athletes.
This figures to be an extended battle in the courts where the NCAA is going to have to justify whether or not the APR ruling is being fairly administered to universities who may not have the resources. Alabama has the resources to spend on one student that Alabama A&M has to spend on the entire athletic programs in one school to keep them eligible. There's some food for thought. Back on the other side, we got more of what you came here for around the HBCU Sports Nation.
1, 2, 3, hit it! Black College move. Ride, come on! Black College, stand up! HBCU!
Here are the rest of the haps from around the HBCU Sports Nation last week. In the MEAC, despite outscoring Robert Morris in the second half, the Howard Bison couldn't overcome that first half hole and fell to the Colonials 22-16. Senior quarterback Jawan Carter accounted for 3 touchdowns, all in the second half. Norfolk State runs for 323 yards. The Spartans outscored the Red Flash 21-6 in the second half. They cruised to a 28-16 win. Off to Division II, where all 12 CIAA teams were in action within the same weekend for the first time this season. Shaw got their first conference win with a 41-6 bludgeoning over Lincoln, who remains winless on the season. Sherwan remained undefeated with a 59-12 rout of St. Augustine's. Sherwan ran off 45 unanswered points over the final 3 quarters. Bryce Witt, don't sleep on him, y'all. He led the charge for the Hawks, passing for 210 yards. Meanwhile, Virginia Union takes control early, never looks back. They defeat Johnson C. Smith 43-7. Union quarterback Colin Morris threw 4 of his 5 touchdown passes in the first half and passed for 390 yards. In a bit of a shocker, Elizabeth City State got their first win of the season with a 19-14 win over Winston-Salem State. Vikings jumped out early to a 13-0 lead. Winston-Salem State tried to rally, but an interception thrown by Cameron Lewis on the Rams' final drive would end the hopes of their comeback. Bowie State improves 3 spots in the national polls after blowing out Livingstone 49-0. Quarterback Jerome Johnson, 2 more touchdowns and ran for another score. The Bulldog defense is the story this year. They held Livingstone to just 72 yards of total offense and just 14 on the ground. And it was Fayetteville State pulling away late. They defeat Virginia State 28-14. Kahari Lane, the Fayetteville State quarterback, threw for 194 yards and 21 completions to the SIAC, where Albany State scored 35 points in the first half en route to a 49-0 win over Clark Atlanta. ASU scores 5 first-half touchdowns and held CAU to only 148 yards of total offense for the game. Fort Valley scored 30 unanswered in their own right in the second half en route to a 56-20 win over Allen at Wheeler Stadium. Fort Valley, 483 yards of total offense behind quarterback Tyrell Jackson. It was Miles 55 in Central State 4. The Bears scored touchdowns on offense, defense, and special teams. Miles is now undefeated in the SIAC at 2-0. They finished with 373 yards of total offense and held Central State to just 123. And that's how they did it around the HBCU Sports Nation.
Black College move. Ride, come on. Black College, stand up. HBCU.
Upon further review, it is clear that HBCUs have to make greater investments. Last week we talked about athletic training. This week we will talk about APR. Note to athletic director and college presidents, nothing worse than having a championship stripped because you're not being compliant. Now, in many respects, it's not your fault. With dwindling endowments and shrinking alumni contributions, it's hard to fund adequate staff in roles of compliance and athletic training. But there's no better marketing tool for your program than a school who wins a championship in one of the big 3 sports: college football, men's or women's basketball. But there's nothing more embarrassing than to have the banners come down. So there's got to be a meeting in the middle where the NCAA has lost control with name, image, and likeness, and of course the realignment of the major college programs. They seem to be keeping the noose on the neck of HBCU programs by grading them with the same scale that they do with their PWI counterparts. And something's got to give. You know good and well these programs don't have the resources to fully fund the amount of people to deal with the amount of athletes who are competing, yet your unwavering hand continues to wield a sharp knife. If there was ever a time for reform, it would be in the way that the NCAA adjudicates APR. And while you got to give Dr. William Harvey, the former president of Hampton University, kudos for introducing a program that will allow a team to benefit from them, the harsh realities of student athletes like Troyce Manassa, who wants the HBCU experience and wants to compete for a national championship, has been lost. But at least he's stepping up to try and make sure it doesn't happen to anybody else who comes along after him. Give me your thoughts. Hit me up at The Sports Groove 24/7, 365, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And check out The Sure Shot on SmashEntertainment.net and on YouTube in case you participate in those games of chance. And remember, bet responsibly, which loosely translated means only spend enough that you can afford to lose. Hey, man, we rolling into the meat of the college football season now. It's about to be on around the HBCU Sports Nation, and you want the news that's fit to talk about, holla at your boy. It's your boy, Mark Gray. Mark with a K, Gray with an A. Thanks for hanging out with us. And remember, as always, we got a full tank of refrigerator stock, and we always ready to roll. We look to pick you up around the HBCU Sports Nation again next week. Deuces.